Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last week of the unit. Time is ticking away, and for those of you who are behind, you're going to want to work really hard this week to get caught up and be able to move on to the next unit next Monday, which is where we're going to move on. So we are at a point right now where you should be working on a research paper, but you're not going to write a whole research paper, which is good news for you because a whole research paper would obviously be a lot of work. You're going to be writing the abstract, which is kind of like a summary of what the research paper would say. So you're going to summarize the results of your research and whether or not your hypothesis was correct and or the extent to which it was correct. And also have your list of works cited, your referencing page in there. But let's take a step back because that's what was released today. So a lot of you are probably wondering, what is my research paper supposed to be on? Okay, so assignment 5 had you create a survey, and that survey was supposed to be based on any one of the 12 topics that you have looked into at this point. So thinking back to your the previous activities on anthropology, then psychology, then sociology, for each of those, you were supposed to look into 4 topics and you're supposed to learn about those topics. So out of those 12 topics, hopefully one of them interested you enough that you'd like to pursue it even further. So as an example, one of the things that I find intriguing is conditioning. So if I was a student, I would focus on that, the psychology part of it. So I'd go back to what I learned about conditioning, and I would formulate some sort of hypothesis. So as somebody who spends a lot of time in schools, one thing that I've often wondered is, how much of education is actually conditioning? And, what are the implications of that conditioning? So are we doing more than just teaching? Are we actually changing the behaviors of people and molding people into becoming something that conforms to to society or to like a system, a desired type of person? Because I think that maybe oversteps the bounds of what education is supposed to be. But anyways, let's not digress. Let's stick to the point. So I'm going to ask a series of questions of people in order to gain some insight and gain some knowledge, and more importantly, to have some actual data, because when you're doing research, this type of research, you have to base your conclusions on actual provable research and facts, because that was Rutherford's criticism of social science, is that we don't end up with something that's really valid because it's too much like, well, some do and some don't, and there's no way to really verify it. It's not like actual science where you can prove something based on evidence. Well, we want to do our best to make our conclusions based on evidence. So if I'm asking questions relating to conditioning in schools, if that's kind of what I'm interested in, then I might ask students a question like, do you ever feel like your teachers impress their beliefs upon you as opposed to just teaching you the subject matter? And I could form that question as like a yes or no, but that's pretty vague. I might form it as like a multiple choice, like this happens often, this definitely happens, this maybe happens from time to time, this rarely happens, or I don't think this ever happens. And so I ask a question like this, and I send that survey out. Either you could send it out electronically and look for people to respond, or you could actually track people down and have them ask them your questions and take down the responses. But at the end of it, if I survey 20 people, then I've got 20 responses here, and I can use the responses to create some data. So if I find that out of the 20 people, 15 people said that either it definitely happens or it happens all the time, then that's meaningful. That tells me that, ooh, this is happening in schools. Or if it's the opposite, if it's 14 people say that this seldom happens or never happens, then you'd say, okay, so this is not happening in schools, right? And that's kind of important to remember is you're going to have to interpret your results, which means you're going to have to think carefully about, what do your results actually mean. So with my 5 response multiple choice question there, what I'm doing is I'm kind of grouping 2 and I'm grouping 2. And that third one, that this maybe happens from time to time, I'm saying that that one is neither a yes nor a no. So that's the way that I would handle the question. I would have 5 options, but I'd be looking for the 2 that show that it is happening and the 2 that show that it's not happening. You could even simplify it down if you don't want to do a whole lot of interpreting of the results. You could just have 3 answers and say, this definitely happens or happens all the time, this maybe happens, and this doesn't happen often or never happens. Form your questions carefully. So I'm going to have a series of questions in my survey, and then I'm going to give the survey out. I'm going to get a lot of data back, hopefully, and the more data the better, because if you survey 2 people, your data isn't as reliable as if you survey 20, and that's not as reliable as if you surveyed 200,000, but you get the point, right? So you get all your data, and then based on the data, you're going, and your hypothesis that you're going to form, you are going to write up your results, right? So if my hypothesis was that schools are performing, schools are a conditioning factor in students' lives, then I ask a series of questions, and try to get data that is either going to show that my hypothesis was correct, or it was not correct, or it was partially correct, and that's what you're going to write about. All right, so here's where you're at. If you are still at the point where you are doing those mind maps and note-taking activities with psychology, anthropology, sociology, then what I suggest that you do is you sort of put that on hold and you move on to this research report, because it's what's important this week. You can go back and you can get caught up later on, and I will mark your late work, it's fine. Choose, so if you've done the first 2, then you've got 8 things that you could use for your topic. So choose 1 and then proceed with this research activity. Come up with a hypothesis, form some questions that are going to give you some data that you can use to either prove that you're right or to disprove your hypothesis, and then give that survey out, get the data, and then use it to create the beginnings of this paper. Remember that it is not a bad thing to be wrong. Scientists are often wrong about their hypothesis, and the whole point is not being right. The whole point is finding out what is true. So don't fudge your results. Don't worry if your results are inconclusive. Don't worry if the results prove that you're absolutely wrong. Just do your best to perform some actual scientific research here and report on what you find out.